Mirror Dear colleagues, good morning. Buongiorno, cari colleghi. I'm glad it's a great honor for me to participate in the conference dedicated anniversary of two great authors, two great figures of medieval East and West, Nizami and Dante Alighieri. And I am so glad to welcome you, although in the virtual space, and to be a chair panel session. I'm Maka Elbakidze, professor of Tbilisi State University, and the sphere of my scientific activities also medieval studies, in particular study of Rustaveli's chivalry romance, the knight in the panther's skin, in the context of world literature. So my interest in this panel was great. According to our agenda, we have 5 speakers today, and we have only 1 hour and 15 minutes time limits. So let's begin. I want to remind my dear colleagues time limit, 15 minutes for each presentation and 20 minutes for discussion. So I want to invite for a presentation my dear colleague, Professor Bela Musaeva from Baku Slavic University, and the subject matter of her paper is love that moves the sun and the other stars, earthly and divine love in the works of Nizami and Dante. Please.
Teşekkür ederim Maka Hanım. Çok şadam sizi görmeye. Bütün konferans iştirakçılarına can sağlığı ve uğurlu çıkışlar arzu ederim. Nizami Gencevi ve Dante Alighieri, iki dahi, iki nəhəng. Onları büyük zaman mesafesi, 2 əsr ve büyük ərazi mesafesi ayırdığına bakmayarak birleştiren mühüm bir cəhət, insanın mənəvi dirçəlişini, humanist düşünceleri təbliğ eder. İnsan şəxsiyyətinə ən yüksək dəyər verən intibah dövrünün nümayəndəsi, daha doğrusu banisi olmaları idi. Hər biri şərqdə, digəri isə qərbdə yüksək humanist idealların carçısı oldu. İnsan duygularının azad edilməsi üçün səslərini ucaltdılar. Hər iki dahinin yaradıcılığında dünya qədər qədim və daim gənc olan məhəbbət mövzusu mühüm yer tutur. Talih Nizamiyə sevmək və sevilmək kimi büyük bir nimət bəxş etmişdi. Bildiyimiz kimi Dərbənd hökmdarı ona Afak adlı gözəl və gənc kənizi tövbə etmişdir. Ancaq Afak ona kəniz yox, sevimli həyat yoldaşı, yeganə oğlunun anası, müdrik məsləhətçi, dost və ilham pərisi oldu. Nizaminin birçok qəzəlləri Maka əsr olunmuştur. Onun surəti şairə Leyli, Şirin, Nüşabə kimi qadın obrazları yaratmağa ilham vermişdi. Afakın çox erkən həyatdan getməsi Nizami üçün ən böyük faciə oldu və bu da onun yaradıcılığında öz əksini tapmışdır. Məhəbbət mövzusuna Nizaminin Xəmsəyə daxil olan 2 poeması, Xasrov və Şirin və Leyli və Məcnun və qəzəlləri həsr olunmuşdur. Bu əsərlərdə şairin dövrün poeziyası üçün tam yeni olan bir cəhəti, insan qəlbinin ən dərin güşələrinə çatıb, qəhrəman keçirdiyi nüanslarını açıb göstərmək bacarığını aşkarlamışdır. Bəzi tədqiqatlarında roman adlandırılan Xasrov və Şirin poemasında 2 məhəbbət xətti mövcuddur. Şirin və Xasrov, Fərhad və Şirin. Xasrov hökmdar, Fərhad sadə xalqın nümayəndəsidir. Fərhad dünyalarca sevdiyi, ancaq onun məhəbbətinə laqeyd olan Şirinin xətrinə qəhrəmanlıq göstərir və Şirinin ölüm xəbərini eşidərək həyatını onsuz təsəvvür edə bilmədiyinə görə özünü öldürür. sosial status və əxlaqi keyfiyyətlərinə görə Fərhadın tam əksi Xosrovdur. Əsərin əsas qəhrəmanı Şirin Xosrovu dərin sevir. Əvvəllər Azərbaycan qadınına xas olan sədaqət, incəlik, fədakarlığını qiymətləndirə bilmir.
Of Azerbaijani woman, devotion, tenderness, and the ability to selflessly love are not appreciated. Despite sincere and ardent love for Xosrov, Shirin at the same time proudly refused to be concubine and overcoming many obstacles to his beloved. The theme of love in Nizami's poem is presented by in the Khosrovan Shiv. So, the poem Khosrovan Shiv vividly illustrates the poet's idea that love is purifying and ennobling feeling that can encourage a person to undertake incredible deeds. Also, this topic is reinforced by social, philosophical, and moral ethical motifs. And the poem Khosrovan Shirin talks about two young loving souls. Lovers are torn apart by the society they live in, backwardness of the environment, their pure, all-consuming feeling not fit into the traditions and canons of their time. Nizami also accepted love, assessed love from a divine perception. And this is also reflected in the image of Majnun. Of course, it's impossible to deny the connection of Nizami with such a widespread phenomenon as Sufism. In describing love, the poet often is using Sufi allegories and concepts. However, as wine is presented both substance for spiritual and physical entertainment. At the same time, it describes in different colors spiritual and physical compassion to a woman. My beloved one, why this night? Come and hug me or stay with me. Stay above. Stay next. And here the poet describes the pleasure two loving bodies receive from each other. In Leyli Məcnun, we can see differences between divine love and the human life.
Təbii məhəbbət alovu ilə yanır. Ancaq əfsuslar olsun ki, Məcnun bu ateşi söndürə bilmir. Çünki Leyli indi onun üçün real qadın yox, bir arzu, bir rüyadır. Ortadan qaçmışdı ehtiras qurşun deyir Nizami. Bu poemada Nizami sevginin pak, saflığını tərənnüm edir. Cismani məhəbbət edərək o şəhvəti rədd edir. Əgər məhəbbət olmasa ismət, o şəhvət hissidir, deyil məhəbbət. İndi isə keçək Dantenin yüksək məhəbbət heykəli adlandırılan ilahi komediya əsərinə. Ədəbiyyatşünas Kriyevski bu əsər haqqında belə deyir. Dantenin məhəbbət öz təravəti və sadəlövhlüyü ilə insanın qəlbinə toxunur. Eyni zamanda burada mürəkkəb hisslərlə yaşayan, ağır istirablar keçirən dahi bir sənətkarın qələmi hiss olunur. Gənc ruhu xüsusi bir istilik və işıq saçır və ilahi komediyadan süzülən məhəbbət ətrini duyan hər bu məhəbbətə laqeyd qala bilməz. Dantenin ilham pərisi Beatrice idi. Onu şair həyatında cəmi birinci dəfə görsə də, ona olan məhəbbəti bütün ömrü boyu qəlbində yaşadır. Nizaminin afaqı kimi Beatrice də dünyanı başında tərk etmişdir. Və Dante də Nizami kimi bu ağır itkiyə ömür boyu yas saxlamışdır. Surətini bir çox əsərlərində əbədiləşdirən Nizami kimi Dante sevgilisi də onu möhtəşəm əsərlər yaratmağa ilhamlandırmışdır. Beatrice həsr etdiyi yeni həyat toplusunda Dante məhəbbəti şairin ən güclü müəllimi adlandırır. Beatrice'nin surəti əsərdə mərhələ-mərhələ dəyişir. Gənc yaşlarında Dante orta əsr saray cəngavər poeziyasının təsiri altında gizli, qarşılıqsız məhəbbəti tərənnüm edir. Sevgilini isə konkret xüsusiyyətlərdən məhrum, çox incə, hətta qeyri-maddi məxluq kimi təsvir edir. Ancaq artıq ilahi komediyada Beatrice'nin obrazı tədricən canlanır, necə deyərlər, ətə qana gəlir, xarakteri müəyyənləşdirilir. Şairi axirət həyatına aparan Beatrice müqəddəslik səviyyəsinə yüksəlir və səmavi hikmətin rəmzinə çevrilir. Əgər biz Nizami'də insan ehtiraslarından uzaq olan ülvi eşq obrazı ilə yanaşı, arşivlərin bir-birinə ehtiraslı görüldüksə, Dantenin ilahi komediyasında Beatrice olan məhəbbət yalnız platonik ruhi məhəbbətin ən yüksək idealıdır. Ancaq onu da qeyd etmişdir ki, Dantenin dünya görüşündəki bəzi ziddiyyətlər, yəni bir tərəfdən humanist idealları, insana maraq və məhəbbət, onu da xoşbəxt görmək arzusu, digər tərəfdən isə insanı dar çərçivədə saxlamağa cəhd edən, hisslərini boğmağa vadar edən dogmaları, cəhənnəmdə olan bəzi günahkarların təsirində də lirik qəhrəmanını cəhənnəmin bütün dairələrindən keçirən Dante sanki oxucuları gələcəyə, əbədi dünyaya hazırlaşdırır. Onları yaramaz hərəkətlərdən çəkindirir, yalan, karlıq, şəhvət kimi mənfi xüsusiyyətlərdən uzaqlaşdırır, fəzilətə çağırır. Digər tərəfdən isə dünyəvi həyata böyük maraq göstərir və bu baxımdan bir sıra kilsə dogmalarına tənqid. Öz dini inanclarını əksinə olaraq, o insanların orta əsr asketizmindən, itaət ideologisindən qurtulmaq cəhdini dəstəkləyir. Məsələn, bir katolik kimi kilsənin cismani sevgini günah sayması ilə həmrəydir və buna görə də şəhvətpərəstləri cəhənnəmin ikinci qatında yerləşdirir. Bu günahkar sırasında güclü axınında əzabla fırlanan Francesca və Paolo da var. Bildiğiniz kimi Francesca və Paolo'nu sahibləri bir-birini bağlamışdır. Ancaq Francesca'nı aldadarak Paolo'nun kardeşi eybəcər, topal, cansız edirlər. Sevgililer görevini devam edir ve onların ehtiras güçlərinin şahidi olan cansız hər ikisi qətlə yetirir. İki göyərçin kimi kucaklaşan Francesca ve Paolo dəhşətli fırtınanın gücü altında xoşbəxt anlarını xatırlayırlar. Halbuki bu xatirələr özü ruhi əzab verir. Dilində bu aşıqların sevgisinə rəğbət bəsləyir və müəyyən dərəcədə məhəbbət ilə bağlı fikirlərini dəyişir. Məhəbbət hissini günah hesab edən sərt, ağır şəraitində sahibani məhəbbətə bəraət qazandırmaq və onu günah hesab etməmək çox cəsarətli bir addım idi. Üstəlik, Dante artıq dini etiqadların təriflədiyi itaətkarlığı da fəzilət zirvəsi kimi qəbul etmir. Bütün dini və dogmatik fikirlər çərçivəsindən kənara çıxan Dante öz ərində sevinç ilə də, əzablar ilə də dolu canlı bir his, məhəbbət hissinin yaradır. Hətta daha əvvəl yazılmış bayram əsərində Dante qeyd edirdi ki, məhəbbət mövzusu ancaq sevgilisinin gözəlliğini veya öz istirablarının təsviri değil. Onun fikrincə, sevgi mənəvi təmizliğe aparan yoldur. Burada da biz Dante ile Nizami'nin həmrəyliyini, oxşarlığını görürük. Təsadüfi değil ki, Virgili Dante'ni cennetin astanasında Beatrice'ye tapşırır ve ona Dante'ye doğru yolu tapmakta yardım etmeyi xahiş edir. Eğer burada Virgili insanı çirkin emellerden daşındıran zeka remzi kimi təqdim edilirse, adı İtalyan dilinde lütf dolu mənası kəsb edən Beatrice əbədi xoşbəxtlik rəmzidir. Məhz cennet təsvir edildiği səhnələrdə oxucunun karşısında yeni bir dünya, güzellik ve xeyirxahlıq dünyası açılır. Dante belə bir qənaətə gəlir ki, həyatın əsas dəyəri Günəşi ve ulduzları hərəkətə gətirən sevgidir. Nizami Dante'nin əsərlərini müqayisə etdikdə belə bir qənaətə gəlirik ki, həm Dante kainatın harmoniyasını təyin edən əsas dəyəri eşqdə, məhəbbəti həm simbolik, mistik tərzdə, həm də real həyat formasında təsvir edirlər. Hər iki şairin fikrincə, eşq, məhəbbət olduqca pak, insana sövq verən və eyni zamanda onu saflığa aparan bir histir. Məhz məhəbbət insanı çirkin əməllərdən uzaqlaşdıra bilər, onu ucaldır. Məhəbbət həm ilahi məhəbbətin, həm də insanın həyat eşqinə, cismani sövqə, sevincinə, təbii istəyinin sintezidir. Təşəkkür ederim.
Thank you very much, Bella. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Please, maybe you have some questions to Bella Hanum. No questions. Thank you once more, Bella Hanum. Thank you very much. And I want to invite Nahid Norozi from University of Bologna for a presentation of a topic, some notes on the love poet in the works of Dante and Neżāmi.
Thank you very much.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno a tutti. Buongiorno. Allora, il mio contributo vuole concentrarsi sull'autoproiezione di Dante e di Neżāmi nella loro opera attraverso modalità differenti. Nella Divina Commedia,
in my speech, I'm going to talk about love inspiration, the work of Dante and Neżāmi. I beg your pardon. In his Divine Comedy, the author poetically presents in Vita Nova the Beatrice and presents a sentimental dialogue. Neżāmi does not have a similar diary of his love. And presents in characters of Farhad in poem Khosrowshahi. So the latter writes almost to the alter ego of through himself. And the focus of it, on one hand, we see the love experience and also different features of a woman who loves. And this indeed, we can see both in Divine Comedy and in Vita Nova. As we know, the diary of Dante's encounters with the Beatrice is poetically transcribed in the Vita Nova and then continues in the large structure of the comedy, where the poet Pilgrim meets again his loved at the threshold of paradise. Nizami does not keep the same, does not have the same desire of love, and maybe it's not a separate genre for the literature, but for Nizami, his first wife was Afak, a Kipchaka slave that he received a gift from the governor of Derbent, who was freed by the poet. And she too, like Beatrice, has died prematurely. Afak will not have the central position that Beatrice occupies in the genesis of Dante's major works. However, the former have a role, at least in creating one character, the beautiful Shirin, protagonist of the most famous of Nizami's 5 works. And at the end of the novel, which tragically ends with suicide next to the house of son, Nizami blessing the audience with the revealing words. And an image of this loving woman is presented in a different way. And it's going beyond well-accepted image of a woman. And Farhad was not just in love, and is a person who is her. The text clearly states Shirin's premature death reminds the poet of the young death of his beloved Afak. But Nizami draws other precise parallels from the comparison between Shirin and Afak, and says that Shirin, one can imagine that she was like my Afak, charming, hit by fate, and pure. And in this regard, we can see a jealous king, and we can see these connections. Why would you love him?
Una situazione in fondo non lontana da quell'amore da lontano teorizzato e praticato dai trovatori, così come da tanti lirici persiani che cantano.
A situation not far from that love from Afak, theorized and practiced by troubadours as well. So enthusiastically seeing the beauties of an attainable friend, but also by the Arab poets of a trade tradition which culminates in the madman. Majnun, the lover of the beautiful and unattainable Layla. To this structural unattainability of the beloved, Dante adds 2 particular aspects. That is, on the other hand, he sublimates, spiritualizes the beloved woman by elevating her beyond the hopes of the highest turns. That is, up to the level of angels. Beatrice became from the heaven to earth to miraculously show, as he says in the famous sonnets. On the other hand, the transfigured woman from her poet lover becomes an agent and dispenser of bliss. It's not coincidence that Dante's beloved is called Beatrice, she who beautifies. And indeed, in Paradise, Dante says that she learned my mind. Coming to me, the protagonist of his novel, Shirin, was born, as we have seen, from an idealization of Afak, Nizami's first wife, died prematurely, but she's not at all angelified as Beatrice in the New Life, and then subsequently in the Divine Comedy. And yet, in both poets, the two women, Beatrice and Sharon, share to varying degrees traits that transcend the earthly reality. They're hallowed by a sacredness that prevents those who have no gender from approaching. Prof will have to suffer until almost the end of the poem, because he can join his Shirin, and basically his jealousy for the silent Farhad stems from the intuition or suspicion Farhad's heart, more gentle and noble than his. It may have reached Shirin earlier. This trait is growing spiritualization of the beloved woman, undoubtedly more marked in Dante and Neżāmi. After all, Shirin, unlike the Beatrice in the New Life or in comedy, is portrayed in all her human and, so to speak, earthly. Nizami, on the other hand, as if wanting to rebalance a story that otherwise would have had no other male protagonist than the fiery and carnal King Khosrow, has chosen to spiritualize Farhad's love, a figure that he draws with conspicuously mystical characters. We can see this at many points in history, through various clues scattered here and there, for example, in the clash between Khosrow and Farhad that I've talked about, and on which now we're on. Let's see some of the most significant verses of this battle inserted in the story Farhad Shirin. First, Khosrow said to him, "Where are you from? From the kingdom of knowledge. In that realm, what art is dedicated to? You can sell your soul." Then Khosrow asked, "It's not a good thing to sell your soul." And Farhad says always, "How's love for Shirin for you?" When Khosrow asked, Farhad replied, "Always in my subtle soul." Here, the insistence of the superiority of the soul, or Jan, over the heart, which is still the place par excellence for the perception of the sacred in the Islamic mystical tradition, wants to underline the whole spiritual rather than earthly nature of Farhad's love for Shirin. It should be also said that in the mind of term soul in Persian means, as well as a soul or spirit, also means alive. And also note from the beginning the close link between love and knowledge. In fact, Farhad says, "I come from the realm of knowledge, where pain is bought and soul is sold." That being devoted to a spiritualized life for Shirin is also found, for example, in Farhad's declared encounter and in the obstinate search for him. And below is distinction to Persian lyrics between dard or love pain caused by separation from the beloved. And Farhad's attachment to the dard or passion pain clearly denounces the mystical character. Just like the Sufi mystic loves even in the harsh, ineluctable necessity of separation. In short, he prefers the dard to the air. No less obvious is the meaning of this other declaration by Farhad, which states, like countless mystics, that there is no longer able to distinguish himself from Shirin. The lover-beloved confusion, however, presupposes a sort of self-annihilation of the lover, the elimination of the earthly ego, otherwise known as the Sufist brand of self-extinction. Mysticism, which prepares for mystical union, in Farhad, the theme of the mystical fana or death clearly echoes. And this forgetting about oneself fully reveals, one would say, the sense of Farhad's love and its unbridgeable difference with the most earthly Prof. The union Farhad has to is the one in which only the beloved exists, in which the sense of existence is determined by her presence after the lover's extinction. The theme, which is due to certainly in both the verse of Dante and Neżāmi, deserves a separate chapter. The strong link between love and death in Farhad's story certainly cannot escape. We find it before the tragic epilogue when Nizami tells us his heart, meaning heart, showed the lacerations of 100 wounds and his soul desired only death. This bond is rooted in the Islamic tradition that recalls a hadith of the Prophet who says, who by loving keeps himself chaste, dies of martyr. In the Farhad of me, this whole Islamic tradition was clearly and properly revitalized, especially Sufi concept of self-extinction of the wayfarer or mystical initiate. One might ask, if Nizami, the beautiful Shirin, embodies the beloved Afaq in fiction, to what extent does the great poet from Ganja project himself into the figure of Farhad? Before answering, let's go to the episode that marks the tragic outcome of Farhad's affair. Notices determination in love for Shirin and in desire, he sees no other solution than to eliminate him with a stratagem. The expression in the world of nothingness, he will run fast towards that nothingness, is of capital importance here. The desire that becomes a dominant theme of his intense macabre delirium. Dante must reach her, as if it's her death that separates him from her. And he will do it, but not as Farhad did, committing suicide, but he will follow her in another way, through art, in the world of fantasy, in the divine comedy. In that sense, Nizami gives a goal to some other heroes.
Scusate, le domande si fanno subito o alla fine?
Dopo, nei 20 minuti finali.
Benissimo.
I guess we should keep questions to the end because we will have another 20 minutes for Q&A.
You have finished, madam?
Yes, finished.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Please, any questions? Maybe somebody has questions. Thank you very much. Now I invite for a presentation Roberto Baronti Marcio from the Cassiano University from Italy. Love in Translation, Nizami&Dante and the English Romantic Poets. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. As the title suggests, the subject of this paper is the reception of Nizami's and Dante's translations in the Romantic period, even though I will focus more on Nizami's and in particular on his Laila and Majnun. Throughout the history of civilization, the art of translation has existed, a bridge that has connected different cultures and languages. This is particularly true in the Romantic period in Britain, during which linguistic and cultural translations took on an absolute due to the rapid change the world. In this context, it is remarkable the effort made by European Orientalists to promote the study of Eastern languages, in particular Persian, to the publication of selected classics in the original language and in translation. Quite a lot of information about Persia's language, literature, history, and culture was being circulated at the time, because Persian was the lingua franca of the Indian courts, the language of diplomacy and governmental administration. And even though this interest was also the result of the growing political concern, expand British Empire, was a sincere and genuine appreciation of Persian culture, poetry, which in fact had an immense impact on the Romantic writers. The father of the Persian studies in the West was the Oriental scholar, British Oriental scholar, Sir William Jones, a famed polyglot translator and poet, who introduced his British readers to Arabian, Indian, and Persian literature. In 1771, he published his Grammar of the Persian language, which proved to be, as had been said, of more use to poets rather than administrators, because throughout his actually scattered the numerous citations from Persian. And we can say that actually language was sincere. It was rooted in his passionate enthusiasm rather than in political. As for the Italian, the scholar and friends speaking in this conference will analyze the question of the translation of Dante's Commedia, which gained considerable momentum in this same period in Britain. As for me, it suffices to say that translations contributed in transforming Persia and in Italy into a cultural imagery, a mental landscape. Very quickly, Persian and the Orient, Italy and the Mediterranean Sea, real or imagined, acquired a wealth of meaning, and for several decades, Persia and Italy were considered as the lands of art, poetry, and imagination. This first-hand study of the language of Persia, Arabia, and India enabled English writers to deal with original works, or at least with direct translation of Persian and Italian into English, and played a major part in the transition of English poetry from neoclassicism to Romantic Revolution. The infinitely complex ghazals, with their vivid metaphors, delicate emotions, and their intricate interplay of Sophic and cosmic images, all developing a theme of appealed to the burgeoning Romantic sensibilities and helped to revitalize the stale themes and the overall classical European poetry. Persian and Italian poetry, for their novel, challenged the limits of the Augustan gentility and the Popian artificiality, and more in general, offered a reinvigorating alternative to the faded classicism of the West, an alternative that could rekindle what Thomas perceived the European imagination. As for Nizami, if Jones refers to, quote, the beautiful poem of the loves of Laila and Majnun by the inimitable Nizami, the first English scholar to translate his work in 1799, and I'm referring to Laila and Majnun, was Isaac Disraeli, who considered Nizami one of the sublimest of the Persian poets. Disraeli, the father of Benjamin Disraeli, the prime minister in the Victorian period, tells his reader that he owned a Persian manuscript, splendidly illuminated, which turned out to be, as I said, Laila and Majnun, even though his book was most likely a composite of the widely circulated Persian adaptation by and other Persian rewritings of the story. Disraeli identifies the reasons of the interest in the poem in certain features that I would define Gothic. In his introduction, he stresses the superiority, the superior feeling of the Arabic version compared to Petrarch, for instance, and the overly expressive passion at the heart of the romance. Besides, he greatly appreciates of, I'm quoting, two fervid Oriental lovers capable of more passion, more grief, and more terror. He also appreciated the delight for the imagination, and he emphatically says a poem that speaks about a maniac and a lover, and also the setting, Arabian desert, opened its numerous horrors. And again, I'm quoting from Disraeli. I must say, not a very encouraging description. Anyway, imagination, burning passion, death, madness, horrors, all these are great appeal for romantics. That the same Gothic interests behind much of the English interest in Italian cultural lore, and as a matter of fact, in Dante's Inferno. The Gothic, of course, the fad of the Romantic and pre-Romantic. Despite the different and sometimes conflicting interpretations of Nizami's Laila and Majnun, which continue even nowadays, Nizami's third poem was received by the Romantics as the depiction of ideal love, in which the lover who truly triumphs is he who has renounced his object. Because Majnun, the madman, after being refused by Laila's father to another, the desert, dies and is finally united only after his death to his lover, Laila. Interestingly, here, the sincerity of passion is judged in the lover's capacity to lose himself in love, in love's ability to be more than itself. A famous image reaching allegorical meaning that speaks of Majnun's devotion for Laila is the renowned Persian motif of the nightingale and the rose, the gull and the bulbul. It goes without saying that the nightingale is at the same time the personification of the lover and of the singer of love, the poet. But more than that, the singing nightingale is the allegory of the intensity of Majnun's passionate and hopeless love and devotion. We are the nightingale of all literary had the longest and most spectacular career. It has appeared in many thousands of poems from Homer to the 20th century. It is a cliche to say that the poet is a nightingale. But one of the most prominent motives that the British Romantics acquired from the Persian sources was the bulbal devotion and excessive love for the rose. This refers to a secondary tradition according to which nightingales born against their breast to keep awake so they might lament all night. The thorn motif goes back to 16th century French poetry, which seems to have taken it from Arabic and Persian poetry, where the male nightingale, or bulbul, sings to the male rose until it blooms. He sometimes presses his breast against the rose thorn to ease his pain while singing. Originally introduced into English through a translation of a Turkish love poem by Lady Montagu in 1717, the same Disraeli defines the marriage of the rose and the nightingale as something very common and widely deployed in minor romantic poetry, before being almost canonical status through more Baroque and most of all by Byron's use of it in The Bride of Abydos and the Java. The rose becomes the supreme inaccessible symbol of divine beauty and perfection, while the nightingale symbolizes the devoted lover yearning to become one with the beloved. There's this beautiful verse translated by Disraeli: the nightingale dies on the road in aromatic pain. Going back to Nizami's Laila and Mejnun, the test of the authenticity of Mejnun passion is his being distracted with passion, is becoming a maniac, and Disraeli translate madness, Mejnun, with mania or maniac. The conflation of love and mania is central to the narrative transformation of Kais to Mejnun. Kais is the previous name. When he becomes mad, he is called Mejnun. He becomes possessed by the image of his beloved, and when his passions overcome his senses, he begins to roam the wilderness in search for Laila, incessantly and obsessively in verses dedicated to his beloved. In Mejnun's mania, love is shown absolutely. But as I have said, that his insanity is mania. His mania is also connected to his poetical genius. Indeed, Mejnun is a poet before he is a madman. His madness only magnifies his poetical gift and makes his suffering heroic. Disraeli hints at this connection between mania and poetry in a footnote, suggesting that Oriental madness is more akin to inspiration than the pathological state of mania. This topic had an immediate relevance for the Romantics, who read in the connection between madness and poetry the ultimate expression of the passion that dwells in poetry, but also the tragic ambiguity of the artist's position in the world. Insanity and poetical genius were two expressions of the same state of mind. They both speak of a soul estranged in the world of man. Only when Mejnun is driven out of the paradise of his early love does he become both insane and a poet. And the same people who reproach, pity, and deride him because of insanity memorize and admire his poetry. But there is another step, of course. Laila and Majnun, William John wrote, and I quote, "It is indisputably built on a true story, yet avowedly allegorical and mysterious, for the to it is a continued rapture on divine love." And the name of Laili seems to be used for the omnipresent Spirit of God. Thus, love expresses not only the agonies of separation from the beloved, but also from the divine entity. And the lover to be filled with an intense longing to get renewed with God. Accordingly, some ghazals can be interpreted on the two aspects of love, physical and spiritual, with metaphorical connotations for material and worldly conception. For example, the beauty of the beloved reveals the beauty of God. These double layers of meaning cause difficult and constant ambiguities in understanding the original text. Anyway, we can say that according to the Romantic vision, there are similarities between Laila and Majnun. Actually, maybe the person who spoke before me said something similar to what I'm going to say. There are similarities between Laila and Majnun and the love of Dante and Beatrice. Although Dante, of course, is not a victim of disruptive passion, but we could ponder some passages from La Vita Nuova, reflect on the meaning of the famous opening image of the Selva Scura in Dante's Commedia. Both in Nizami and Dante is a passion that overwhelms and transforms, which transcends worldly constraints, threatens social duties, and liberates the lover from the ordinary conventions. As in Beatrice, for instance, in Canto 21st of the Paradise, Dante says, "Tu m'hai di servo tratto a libertade." Love brings a spiritual elevation into a mystical union in God. In this sense, both Nizami and Dante etherealize the lover bond, the mystical quest for unity. Like the nightingale, the lover experience.
Excuse me, please. 15 minutes time limit
Okay.
is, yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, please. I'm sorry to
I
interrupt you,
got
but
only
we have
2 minutes.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Through love, Laila and Majnun renounce themselves and become one. All these ideas are deeply influenced by Sufism, and actually Sufism is very much important for the Romantics. And so I just want to go very quickly to my final idea, that in Romanticism, what we have been speaking about, this annihilation of the lover and the beloved, being something different. Because the Romantic had a more secular reading of the journey of the lover, madman, and poet, annihilate in his beloved. Actually, the Romantics substitute this annihilation in the lover in what I would say annihilation in the world of art. We know that within the European bourgeois culture, art or the artistic apprenticeship was gradually equated to religion, and finally replaced religion, culture in secular circles. the power of art to evoke the transcendent, the ability to reveal the divine in man, relation of art to beauty, to the ideal, was led artists and thinkers to equate and religion. And the step is Keats. Keats develops his idea of negative capability. Is this quality, because by negative capability he means that the poet has not self, it has no character. In Keats, the poet becomes a selfless entity. Negative capability is the quality of the poet that is able to lose his self-identity, to beauty his self-consciousness, and dwell in a state of openness to all experience. So in this final twist that transforms the mystical unity, the beloved of Nizami and Dante transform this metaphysical and spiritual in a quasi-mystical union with his own art. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I want to invite Maria Teresa Giaveri from University of Torino, Accademia delle Scienze, Italy. Dante in the 20th Century, a title, A Rhythm, a Denied Love. Please.
Grazie.
Nice to
Un
meet you.
titolo, Westland, un rythme, la figure rythmique vide qui vint obséder Paul Valéry, come dice lui stesso, generando nel cimetière amore negato. L'interpretazione dell'amore di Dante.
A rhythmic. If we say with the words, denied love.
Dante è diventato figura sorprendentemente stellare delle avventure e delle sperimentazioni poetiche novecentesche.
We know that Dante was an inescapable presence in the civil and political consciousness of the 19th century, but he has also become a surprisingly titular figure in the adventures and poetic revolutions of the 20th century, from the late symbolism to futurism, from surrealism to modernism, from the US and all the way to USSR. The new Western poetry seems to take from Dante the power and the tools to convey a modern vision of the world. But Dante's vision was inherently whole. The image of the post-war world looks deserted and regular. Before the First World War, Europe exported political, philosophical, aesthetic, and social concepts all over the world. After the war, this creative European energy seems to end. The idea of finished Europe finds a perfect translation in the linguistic mosaic of a poem, The Wasteland, that renews in his title the same adjective proposed by Dante in the vigor of his political polemic, qua or waste. The last century of the millennium opens, in fact, to the consciousness of the destruction of a civilization that had become worldwide. Notre civilisation, nous savons maintenant que nous sommes mortels. The words written in 1919 by Paul Valéry seems to echo those which Rutilio Namaziano commented at the end of the Roman Empire. There are no words that can irritate me. And all these words are driving me to the end of life. To this civilization that was not destroyed, like Rome, under the blows of the barbarians, but by its own internal violence, the ancient poet of a much more compact Europe offers surprising models and examples, thematic analogies and linguistic solutions. We have already mentioned Eliot's huge debt to Dante, exemplified in the adjective chosen for the title that has caused so much discussion among translators, critics, and poets. From the first translation of the Maria Praze to the of the poets Caproni and Guidici, with a precise quotation from the 17th century Canto del Inferno, up to the very recent and interesting solution of our colleague Carmen Gallo. La Terra Devastata, the quotation from Dante multiplies its suggestions, which then echo from the title to the end of the poem. Even writers who seem distant from Dante, precisely because of the tagliente experienced as an empty family inheritance, reveal, like Paul Valéry, a surprising influence underlying the openly anti-biographical past. See the example of the most important poem of the French literature, of the Entrée de Guerre, and describes his writing process as generated by the obsession with an empty rhythmic figure. 20 years ago, I proposed an interpretation that is now accepted by Valéry critics. The rhythm Valéry seeks between the decasyllable and the Alexandrine verse is the Italian hendecasyllable in Dante's texture. Therefore, if we of Dantean elements in Eliot and Valéry that are fundamental to the construction of the two great poems, the role of Dante has had in the writing of Borges is very particular. The discovery of La Divina Commedia comes quite late for the Argentine writer, preceded perhaps by some knowledge of the translation of Longfellow. But the revelation of Dante's world will take place with the bilingual edition of the English publisher Dante. And it says that it all began before the dictatorship. I was employed in a library in the Almagro neighborhood. I had to travel a long distance in slow and lonely tramways. By chance, but I came across 3 small volumes. They were very small. They fit in my pocket, and I started working on them. So, 1 page of Italian text and the other hand English translation. And it's important to look how Dante's works appeared in English literature. You know, in Italian language had its own structure in those years, and it much depends from the translator wisdom to be able to expose, to dwell into that period. And in his daily journey from home to work, Borges not only managed to hear the intonation, the accent of Dante's voice, but a curious isotopy between the two poets when he reaches the passage where Dante, at the top of the Purgatorio, is abandoned by Virgil and finds Beatrice. He feels he can read the Italian text directly, abandoning the English, which he will henceforth limit himself to glancing at from time to time, and it comes to Divine Comedy. In different critical essays, it says that Borges became a scholar, translator, and some exaggerated translation of Dante's text, defined as el mejor que han escrito los hombres. The Commedia would nourish his writing in prose and poetry and would become the itinerary towards a greater knowledge of Italian literature and a completely different vision of Italians in Italy. I don't know if the details reported by Borges is true. If really his encounter with Tuscana language took place in Canto 31, or meeting between Dante and Beatrice. Certain, however, that this is a canto that greatly interested the Argentinian writer. He has written pages of analysis on it, and that are among the most scandalous, you know, and at the same time, very specific to his writing. If we talk about controversial pages, yes, Borges comments on the canto speaking of a miserable scene and even of a complicated ugliness. The encounter with his beloved, which should be an admirable passage, appears to him to be an inexplicable allegorical complexity. The reason consists, in his opinion, in the unraveling of the compensatory mechanism that presides over the entire creation of Dante's love dream. To fall in love, writes Bourget, it's to create a religion with a fallible God. The Dante professed an idolatrous adoration for Beatrice. And when Beatrice was dead, Beatrice lost forever. Dante continues his writing in seeking for her. And when we move further, we can see that his aspirations to meet Beatrice again are totally meaningless. And here, it becomes very complex by Kant. And in strangely hostile character, for example, forever rejected by Beatrice, he dreamed of Beatrice, but dreamed her as terribly severe, dreamed as inaccessible, dreamed her in a like a bird flying over the sky. And these images definitely prefigure a nightmare. Oh, they existed infinitely. Very little, perhaps not at all for Beatrice. Always to forget, pity, our veneration, this chord, which for Dante was unforgettable. If we look at some scholars underline the Dantean references in different ways. Interpretations like Bourget lead us not only to help us to understand Dante not only through the Divine Comedy, and I can tell that only Bourget he was not only inspired by his works, but also presented his view. And we can see that Bourget entrusted to a writer, the Frenchman, Serge Bramley, during an interview that turned into a series of conversations and was then only partially published. And he says, have you read the books? He said, true. The Aleph is a vague parody of the Divine Comedy. I amused myself in a perhaps somewhat puerile way by making Virgil a vaguely ridiculous character, Argentino Daneri. I even kept Beatrice's name and naturally gave myself the role of Dante. I also found it amusing to locate the mouth of hell, a stone's thrown from my house. We know that the story came about as a result of the period of work at the Miguel Cain Library, the suburban location to which the first assistant of the third employee, Bourget, arrived on the aforementioned tram, and he found the readings. With the years, the writer will remember for the unhappiness, wear and tear of the ignorant idlers, sometimes violent, since the woman who frequently visited the library was right there, even though outside the library they were animated by friendship and recognition. And this was an alteration of frustration. And these years were unhappy time for, like Beatrice for Dante, Estella Canto, that it was a literal admiration for Bourget, but no love. At the beginning of the Aleph, we can see that narrator Bourget receives the news of the death of his beloved Beatrice with the Shakespearean formula, the universe may change, but not me. The literary emphasis is tempered only by the melancholic irony of the ever-rejected lover. And here the quotation refers to Dante's project idea delivered in the Vita Nova. I knew that at times my fruitless devotion had annoyed her. Now that she was dead, I could devote myself to her memory without hope, but also without humiliation. I 1 minute left, so I will. Okay.
Yes, I'll ask her. Yes, of course. Thank you.
against the expected pain of oblivion. The character Borges proposed a personal cult of memory. He insinuates himself into Beatrice's family. He established a relationship with her cousin.
I'm so sorry, but time limit is finished.
Unfortunately, I have to shorten my speech due to the time limits.
Yes.
Scopre la relazione, la relazione fra
And I wanted to say that the beginning of new century, the heroes of new century, brings a new generation of new researchers. And in 1943, we can see that Dante is looking into the works of Dante and interpretations of Borges. The themes of Borges and Dante are thus combined in his writing and in his biography. Denied love, the wear and tear of a daily life as an exile, the foreign humanity, the redemption of a secret journey to another world. That's what I wanted to share today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to invite now our last speaker, Najafzadeh, from Institute of Manuscripts named after Muhammad Fizuli, Azerbaijan. Intersecting lines in the works of Nizami and Dante Alighieri. Please.
Salam, hər birinizi salamlayıram. Sizə uğurlar.
Good afternoon. I would like to welcome each and everyone. I would like to thank organizers for this event and wish you all the best. So, if we talk about Dante and Neżāmi, from the first look, these are two different individuals living in the East and West. And it might sound odd if you want to find intersecting lines, but as we listen to previous speakers, we can see a lot of intersecting and matching issues. Nizami is the greatest representative of Azerbaijan literature, and Dante, Dante, who lived a century after Nizami and was a very prominent figure for his time. At the end of the day, both of them came to an opinion that earthly life should be about bringing happiness to others. And in Khamsa, Nizami and Dante in Divine Comedy, they talk about sin and savor. They talk about wisdom and eternal life. Nizami is attaching special meaning and is expressing, it says that life continues until 40, and aspiration for life dies after 40. And he presents in his book that human nature has a lot of temptations, and until 40 is a big responsibility, and a lot of efforts are needed to reach 40, and after 40 you can struggle, but you need friends and you need inspiration. And I want to say that I have exceeded 40, so And in general, we all know well about midlife crisis. We see that this age limit is also presented in Dante's Divine Comedy. In the very first verse of the work, the poet states that he's on the verge of 40, and at that time, he's facing his new doors, new world. The poet is expressing his opinion artistically as following. And he says, as I spent half of my life in this world, I entered a forest as dark as darkness. I lost the right path in a valley of darkness. The artist wants to say that. The writer says that the time to live with emotions is over. It's time to act according to the rules of the mind, but my soul is still inexperienced and it needs a guide. It should be noted that Nizami, similar to Dante, has repeatedly stated in his works that he needs a guide on the path to perfection. Both authors show that women are guides, heralds of justice, honesty, integrity on that very path to spiritual perfection. While Nizami's the image of perfect woman or lovers separated by this. In Nizami's performance, Afag is that personality. In Dante's, it's Beatrice, his first love. And these real historical figures are dying prematurely and forcing poets to walk alone in their future life. In Kotrova Shirin, Nizami presents the protagonist of the work, Shirin, to his first love, Afag. He says, she's a bit of sweetheart because she quickly left this world like a rose withered in younger years. Kupchak filtered like an arrow, Afag was like my lover itself. And the poet is saddened by separation of his heart. And we encounter similar verses in Dante's Divine Comedy. He talks about underworld, and he's telling that he will meet a soul of his heart. And he says, if you go up a little higher, a dignified heart will meet you there. You go with that soul, I go back. And this was the heart of Beatrice. According to the sources, Beatrice Portinari was Dante's secret lover, and the woman who was forced to marry someone else died very early. There was more of a platonic love between this woman and the poet. Her untimely death had a devastating effect on the poet, and the poet immortalized her image in his work. As a result, Beatrice's image has long been a symbol of an attainable love in the European literature, similar to the one we have about Leili. Dante depicted Beatrice in Divine Comedy as a saint, similar to the Saint Mary, the blessed woman who gave birth to Jesus. And it presents surrounded by angels. And it says that her 7 divine fairies were shepherds, holy candle in her hands, and one can dare to extinguish. So the loss of both poets, their physical separation, their spiritual unity, and their aspiration for reunion, desire for reunion, strengthen their faith in eternal life. Although the question seeking for eternal life, life after death, are the very renowned topics, similar topics among the ancient and literature to date. Interestingly, both poets who lost their guide on this path needed a spiritual master. That mission was fulfilled by imaginary characters. In Khamsa, it's Khizr, a prophet, according to Islamic belief, who gained an eternal life by drinking the water of life. In Divine Comedy, he's Virgili, the most famous poet of the golden age of ancient Roman literature, who lived The image of Hızır, who appears as a common literature hero in Eastern literature, is described in Hamsa as a half real, half imaginary personality who shows the way of truth to both literary heroes and Nizami himself, and has a power to purify hearts. In İskendernamə, the poet says, "You cannot hear him with your ears. Hızır taught me a secret yesterday. O servants of my actions, the word, the people who enjoy my words, taste my words. I heard the horns singing. You create words like a flowing water. Be a true liar. Let everything be done. There should be no losses on the way to eternity." So, in Dante's Divine Comedy, Vergili also presents a point, certain creative direction, provides an advice like an elderly person. You have to take a new path. There's another way for you, urging him to purify himself, similar to the way Hızır was advising Nizami. As we can see, in general, there are certain intersections between the works of both poets, the great Azerbaijani poet Nizami&Dante and the Italian poet Dante, who was born in a completely different environment half a century later. Finding these intersections and discovering parallels in the legacy of these two great masters can help to reveal similarities in the culture and philosophical outlook of two nations. Both poets have a similar position in their philosophical views of life, the world, the human being, and in their thoughts of death, eternal life, and search to salvation. Both of them were looking for a guide to rescue, and they create an imaginary characters, Hızır and Vergili. And I would like to thank our fellow colleague, esteemed professor, Ms. Rahile Geybulayeva, who has been helping us in our research. And she's also one of the organizers of our today's event. Once again, let me wish you all the best in your activities.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. It was our last presentation, and I want to say thank you to all the speakers for interesting papers. And once again, we witnessed the process of intersection of West and East, which is the main factor for the development of world culture in general and literature in particular. Thank you very much. We have only 10-15 minutes till the other session begins. So if we have some questions to our presentators, please. Maybe somebody has some questions.
Io vorrei chiedere, can I ask to Professor Javeri, vorrei chiedere a Marina Javeri, di cui ho apprezzato molto, I much appreciated her speech.
To ask Professor Javeri, I really liked your speech, and
I'm here.
Yes.
In the last part of your presentation, I failed to follow the speech till the end. May I ask you to repeat the last part of your presentation? I'll try to share on screen. My question is, you had a very insightful presentation, but I unfortunately missed the final part. So it will be a pleasure to listen to that part again. You know, we have been talking about two characters of different, about similarities in their love, in their aspirations. So let's talk about three elements. You know, on one hand, the developments in the works, perception or interpretation through the modern literature, as well as and revealing the intersecting elements. So I was trying in my speech, at the end of my speech, to summarize that texts. I've told that different studies and different researchers have done presented different approaches. And the idea I arrived after studying different studies is that it is important to and analyze and it's important to read all the studies in order to reinforce the ties and strengthen the understanding between different cultures. Sure, go ahead. I wanted to say something. Sure, go ahead. My name is Nicola Bettivieri. It's a pleasure. Sure, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Now, Carlos Saccone.
Yeah, I followed your speech.
Yes.
To tell you the truth, I followed your speech and about intersection with the Divine Comedy. Borges has read the comedy and translates into English, and I believe that this is quite a common for many translations. If I take any classical work and I start translating it, can you imagine how many translated works you would find before starting? Let's say there are some points that are absolutely different, like Mr. Massetto and others can talk about that. Many people are interested in translating, but there are so many different interpretations, different translations. So even if you take academic circles of the United States, still there are a lot of conflict and a lot of confusion. You know, if we talk about translations, you know, vis-a-vis the Divine Comedy, there are different translations, and they're usually, some of them are not matching. Yes, you're right, but the paradigm is some ideas have been distorted or presented. That's probably because of the Italian language. Even you have to study the life of this poet to understand. It's not about the term of love. At the same time, the contemporary ideas, the environment they have lived in. So that love is special feeling, something which was not well probably thought, but in general. There are a lot of commonalities. You know, Borgia itself is about Nightingale. Usually, whoever writes first, all the cameras are supposed to that persons, and other researchers are not so attractive. So we should not be focusing on Borgia only. Yes, I'm taking you serious. Yes, indeed. The time they live that, or modern time. But to me, their work idea. It pretty much depends on the depth of the search. You prove something, and if you want to prove, you have to work with different translations.
Thank you very much. Carlos Saccone has a question.
Thank you very much.
And then Mr. Najavzad has it. Please.
My question is to fellow colleague Nahid Norozi. About Prof and Shirin by Nizami. A fellow colleague suggested that it was written because of Afag and Afag that Nizami was created that character because of Afag, and he was inspired of his love to Afag. Yes, if there are I see no doubts if there are biographical information, but at the same time, I believe that if we talk about Firdausi, we talk about Khosrow and Shirin, if we look into the content, I would rather suggest that my fellow colleague to tell us.
Firdausiano, cioè del libro dei re, nel suo poema, appunto nel Khosrow e
There's Shirin in Firdausi and work. How far these two are different? How far Afag was impersonated? Nizami himself clearly says that in Khosrow and Shirin, he's presenting comparative view of his life. In his work, is slightly different from the Shirin of Firdausi, and we know this well. But it's not, the difference is not that great. Nizami has transformed Nizami has made imperfectionized or the image of Shirin. And we can see curiosity, and we see that it brings to tragedy. But it's not so obvious in Firdausi's Shirin.
Maschile Re Khosrow. Anzi, la sua figura emerge persino
presented in a different view before the Khosrow. We have talked about Beatrice's image and in Dante's approach. So Nizami
Farhad che sia degno di lei, ecco, un carattere, diciamo, un personaggio, un amante diametralmente opposto, diciamo così.
And Farhad is different as an image.
Thank you. And last question, please, Mr. Javakhishvili.
Əlavə eləmək olarmı? Nahid xanımın cavabına müəyyən əlavə eləmək mümkündür.
Can I contribute to the response provided by Ms. Norozi? Can I add? So I wanted to say that Nizami in Shirin says that he used a manuscript from Barda, a city in Barda. So it is a city in today's Azerbaijan. At the same time, Shirin is a niece of him and is a member of Afrasiyab family. So we can trace her history. And today, if we look at Azerbaijan, so when Khosrow travels, he travels through the areas that are contemporary Azerbaijan. And difference with the Firdausi Shirin is that Firdausi Shirin is the queen of Azerbaijan. She's reached the pinnacle of kingdom and is doing reforms and is a beloved ruler. At the same time, is the first ideal woman character of Azerbaijan literature. We can see her riding a horse, playing modern ball, and a powerful woman who can confront men, which is also a prototype of woman from Gorgut, the epic work of Turkic nations. And I want to thank Mr. Marchio, but maybe there was misunderstanding in the translation. If we talk about, when you say representative of Persian literature, we name him representative of Persian language literature, because Persian language was lingua franca from India all the way to and official elite adopted Persian, as in Europe we can see that in 16th century France, England, most of the people were writing in Latin, but it doesn't mean that those writers are Latin or Italian writers. At the same time, because of the time he lived, and for a broader recognition, he was writing and he was creating his works in Persian language. In Azerbaijan, researcher Nizami&Dante analyzing works of Nizami, namely Iskandername, and she has been analyzing the vocabulary, and most of the barbarisms were from Turkic languages, and it helps us to come to a conclusion that he was thinking in Turkic but writing in Persian. And many Iranian scientists and researchers are also echoing this opinion, and they say that he smells Turkic. And today, when Persian people of Persia are reading, or Iran are reading his poem, they do not understand. But even the phrasal verbs even the items, I'm sorry, are being translated from Turkic. Once again, I would like to thank Mr. Roberto Paronti Marcillo, but I just wanted him to be aware of this difference.
Yes, I just want to add that actually I made reference to the fact that Persian language was a, yes, Persian language as a lingua franca, I said. Exactly. And also, yes, since I was referring to
Ola bilər bizdə tərcümədə bu problem meydana gəlir sadəcə.
Maybe there was a misunderstanding in the translation. I just wanted to share my opinion as well, and thank you very much for bringing clarity.
I was saying that, of course, I was also referring to British culture. The problem with British culture in that period is that for them, they had a very general idea about what Eastern culture or Persian language or for them the East was exactly from Greece to Japan was the Eastern countries. So sometimes the problem was born also from the fact that they refer to Persian in general, because actually anyway what they define Persian culture was the model for them, was the model. What they were very much fascinated by Persian culture in general. They called that Persian. So I imagine that it was not exactly, but was not correct. But this is the problem that, as I said, the English are to use these terms very imprecisely. Okay, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, after 5 minutes, another session begins on the Zoom platform. So I want to say thank you to everybody and see you later, please. Goodbye. Goodbye to everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Just let me to remind you that the next panel will be at 15:40. It means in 5 minutes. So see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maka. Thank you to all of the panelists for your research, for
Thank
your
you.
work. Thank you. See you in 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. See you later.